A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
It's such bad timing in some sense, I think, for what happened today to have happened. I'm a great admirer of the constitutional monarchy system. I think there's a wisdom about it. There are obviously monarchical systems, constitutional monarchies still left in Europe, but they're kind of a pale reflection of what you've got in the UK. And the thing about the monarchy that's so cool, in the United States, there's the judiciary and the legislative branch and the executive, that separation of powers, and the checks and balances that are part and parcel of that. And that's a bright system. And then you also have the states, and they have their power against the federal government, and that stops anything from becoming too tyrannical in principle. But here, and in Canada, although less so in Canada, because we're, modern and trying to dispense with the monarchy, modern, confused, dim-witted, and untraditional, and casual and careless. And then we have the French-English problem, which makes things more complicated on the monarchical front. You have 4 divisions. You have executive, legislative, judicial, and symbolic. And the monarch holds the symbolic weight. And that's really smart because it separates it to some degree from the political weight. You see what happens in the United States is, well, first of all, is the president tends to turn into the czar. Because they have this idea in the United States now, like first lady. It's like, what the hell is that? We don't have that in Canada. Nobody knows anything about Justin Trudeau's wife. And that's been the history of Canadian politicians. It's like, just because you're Justin Trudeau's wife doesn't mean you're queen. But in the United States, it's like, well, Hillary Clinton, maybe she's queen. And that's partly because there is that demand for the symbolic weight that the leader should manifest. And you also see that to some degree in the United States, which is a star-worshipping culture, obviously, with the glitterati and the royalty of Hollywood. And it's better put there. It's better put there in the entertainment section, even though that's also somewhat dangerous because it tends to elevate actors into pronouncers of ethical virtues, say. But better there than in the political realm. And so I really admire the monarchical system, and I think that for whatever reason, the UK has done a wonderful job of maintaining that. And I think a very economically canny job too, because I know the economic analysis indicate that the royal family generates way more income than they spend. Because they're a major, and everything they're associated with here is a major tourist attraction. It's this tradition that you have here, this monarchical tradition, is something that's tremendously attractive to people who don't have that. Canadians, for example, Americans, and because it's so theatrical and so unique. And then you had Queen Elizabeth, who, man, that's quite the woman there. How many, 13 prime ministers? And so you had someone around to intimidate all your prime ministers. That's a really good idea, and I'm sure she did a fine job of that, And so, yeah. You can imagine how useful it was psychologically, in some sense, for the prime minister who has monarchical temptations in some sense, like Trump did, to have to go on a regular basis to this remarkable person who'd seen this immense span of political history and confess in some real sense, right? And to be subject to her cautious and wise judgment, because I think she was a woman who was traditional and cautious and wise in the highest degree. And there were scandals in her family, but like you have a family, if people knew what your family was doing, don't you think there'd be scandals? And so, but she was remarkably free of scandals over that entire period, and that's a hell of a thing to manage for 70 years. And so, so what will happen now? Well, the most likely thing is that your monarchy will disintegrate like most of the other ones have. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm certainly not saying I want it to happen. But because that sort of thing is so hard to maintain, especially in the modern world, and because you need someone so remarkable to manage it, the probability that you'll get another one is relatively low. And so I wish your new king the best, that's for sure. But maybe you'll get lucky, and maybe your monarch, and maybe with your support, will rise to the occasion and your country and the rest of the British Commonwealth will recognize that what they have in the shared bonds that unite them based on English common law and the great democratic tradition that's so much a function of this country, and this country really in particular. I mean, you're the birthplace of both Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, India, these amazing countries, these free, democratic, productive, generous societies. It's quite the accomplishment. And I see in England and Europe, but in England too, in Great Britain, such apprehension about that, such refusal to note the greatness of your country and its contributions. I mean, you know, no one in the United States ever talks about the fact that the UK was the country that eradicated slavery. Like that only happened once in the whole history of the human race. You know, and your country did it. It took 175 years. And a huge economic. Yeah.